The world order was made in 1945 at the end of a war. And a civil war can begin a new order inside of a country. The Chinese Civil War began their new order 1949. And so that's like a new beginning. They always come out of wars. And a war is a fight for how the system works. So we'll begin there. After the fight of how the system works, it's a great leveler. It gets rid of a lot of the debts and it starts over. And then there's a new power. In the United States, the New World Order, it was an American world order because the United States won World War II. It had 80% of the world's gold. Gold was money. It had the dominant military power. It had nuclear weapons. And because of that, we began the American world order. They carve up the world. Here are the borders. This group gets this piece and so on and so forth. And then they begin. And by the way, this has happened repeatedly throughout history. And so they start off with those new rules of the game. And you enter a period of peace and prosperity. And it's peace because nobody wants to fight the dominant power. The dominant power won. And there's a change in psychology really that you're dealing with, because quite often these things take place. They take a generation or more to take place, a lifetime. And the people who enter the war do so boldly. But everybody who enters the war and then goes through the war wish they never went through the war because it's so terrible. But they come out and the war is over. They want peace, they want productivity, and so on. And it's a great leveler, less wealth gaps and so on. And they work well together and they build a period of peace and prosperity that is a long period of peace and prosperity. But during that peace and prosperity, more and more prosperity takes place, and they increasingly bet on that prosperity, and people get more in debt. And so you see the debt levels rise, and you see naturally as prosperity comes, it comes in unequal ways, and some get richer than others. And so wealth gaps rise. And then those wealth gaps increasingly create opportunity gaps because the rich people have more resources to educate their children and of them the benefits. And so that happens over a period of time while the economy gets more indebted. And of course, as time progresses, other countries also rise. Those maybe that even lost the war, like Germany and Japan, they rebuild and they become competitors. And so what was a unique power of having won the war becomes less unique as there was more competition. And then you get a new generation of people who have a different mentality. They get used to those benefits and so on. And they are, let's say, less cautious in their financial behavior and so on. And so the classic ingredient also is that that country that wins the war also has the world's reserve currency. Because, okay, you need a currency to transact internationally. It's like a language. You need a language to transact internationally. And the winner of the war gets the world's reserve currency because everybody thinks that's the most stable. And they also want to save in it. So I think there are three big forces to keep your eye on. And when you see them in their cycle, then it's clear. First, are you earning more than you are spending? I want them to look at it as the country. But the country's nothing more than the aggregate of the people. And so when you look at those three forces, I want to make sure that they're clear and you could align them up and you could see where you are. Is the country earning more than it's spending and building savings? Or is it spending more than it is earning and creating debt? Because one man's debts are another man's assets. And when somebody is holding those assets and they're producing a lot more of that money and debt, money goes down in value as they produce it to produce that buying power. And then that gets people bad returns. It produces a higher amount of inflation. And then people get out of cash and bonds. And that produces rising interest rates while there's rising inflation. And that produces stagflation. So I want them to get the mechanics of that because that's happening now. You could see it. This is not controversial. We are producing a lot of debt. We're spending a lot more than we're earning. And as a result, they're printing a lot of money. And the printing of a lot of money creates a lot of inflation. And with that inflation, cash is trash. You don't want to hold cash. And you get out of that. And that causes rates to rise. And that's one of those three factors. So you can see it happening. The second force is the internal conflict force, how you are with each other. Are you operating cohesively, common mission, and moving in the right direction? The system working? Or are you at each other's throats? Is the system threatened? Because history's shown when the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. And that is a risky situation. It's a risky situation because it produces disorder and it can produce a form of civil war. And at those times, when you have that, you see greater and greater polarity. In politics, it shows up at greater and greater populism of the left and populism of the right. And populists want to fight for their side. They're not moderates. Moderates want to work together to try to find a compromise that's best for the whole. Populists appeal to their crowd by saying, I am fighting for you, and they will fight each other. And that fight can be at the threat of the system. So in history, for example, we saw 4 democracies in the 1930s choose to become dictatorships as one side fights to the other because they become so disorderly. And we have a system right now that you could see that it is possible in elections that neither side might accept losing. And so the system becomes in jeopardy. And you see that the moderates leave the system. It can't be moderate. You have to pick a side and fight. And so you see this in the French Revolution. There were moderates in the early part of it, that recognizing that there were problems and wanting to work together. The moderates got guillotined. Polarity began. The same was true in the Russian Revolution. The same was true in the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and so on. Polarity gets greater and greater as there's a greater intensity to fight. And that is the internal piece. So that's the second force. And the third force is the rise of a great power, the geopolitical force that's going on, that we're seeing today with China and Russia and so on, and how that's changing. Because when the power of a country diminishes, when we get weaker financially, or how we are with each other, and so on, there are greater vulnerabilities. And there's always the competitive power that learns how to become stronger. Competition always happens. There's the establishment and then there's the new competition. And as they get stronger in all ways, militarily and commercially and so on. And that's the dynamic that we're seeing. The events that happened in the Ukraine, and that is bringing all this development internationally up at a little bit quicker pace. It's the same dynamic. There are two sides and there'll be neutral countries, just like in the war. There was the Allies and the Axis powers, and then there are neutral countries. And so that part is developing. The US conflict part is probably progressing a little bit quicker. On the world order, the developments in the Ukraine, maybe I should put those in perspective. There is a very close relationship, a common objective of the Russians and the Chinese. So there is a competition in the